So welcome everyone to this Intralingo Spotlight. I'm Lisa Carter, founder and creative director of Intralingo. And today I am so happy to have with me Sawad Hussain, who is a translator. Welcome, Sawad.
Hi.
So good to have you. And can you remind me, where are you located?
So I'm located in Cambridge in the UK.
That's what I thought. Excellent. Good. So it's your evening there.
Yes. Yeah.
Good, lovely. So, Sawad, we're going to talk specifically today about your most recent translation from Arabic, the novel Mama Hissa's Mice by Saud Alsanousi, and we're going to dive into that in a minute. But first, I'd really love to hear from you a little bit about your trajectory as a translator.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So I didn't actually start translating until 2009. That was the first time I translated a literary work. I was doing my master's in Arabic literature at SOAS in London. And then at the same time, I was approached by a translation agency to translate a Palestinian work, which never saw the light of day, but it was my first sort of engagement with literature. And the book itself, I won't mention the name, but it wasn't that good anyway. So I'm actually glad that it didn't go any further. But that was my first actual book length project. And after that, I had originally thought, oh, this is so easy, I could make this into a career, but then I didn't get my next book contract for, I would say, another 4 years or so. So in the meantime, I had just been doing, I'm an Arabic teacher by profession. So while I was teaching, I was also doing literary translation on the side for journals. I did a lot of literary festival sort of publications for Arab Lit. So I was living in Dubai at the time, so I'd go to the Abu Dhabi Book Fair and do interviews with authors. And aside from that, I think, I was doing mostly just a lot of reviews, trying to gain traction as someone who knows the Arabic literary scene so that publishers would take me seriously. And then eventually, finally, the first book that I did, I actually ended up doing it for free. Just because I was finding it difficult. I got royalties, but to get your foot in the door, unfortunately, so I was doing so many samples for, big name publishers, but the issue was that they said, well, you've never done a full length work with a publisher that we know. So they would like the book that I would pitch, but then inevitably give it to another translator, which is very just, disheartening. So then finally I started my first actually book that got published was with a press in Hong Kong called Signal 8 Press. It was a Jordanian sci-fi novel. And after that, I just got a whole bunch of offers coming in. So really in the past, I would say 3 years, I've gotten so much more work than, the first part of my career. So I know it's really difficult. You're kind of in this sort of limbo where, you don't have the experience for publishers to take a chance on you, but then nobody's willing to take a chance on you unless you've done a book. So I think, unfortunately, a lot of translators are in a similar situation where your first work is either unpaid or it has to be funded by a grant, but there's not a lot of grants for Arabic.
Yeah, your trajectory, it sounds so similar to so many of us who are literary translators. It's not an easy profession to get into, but it's wonderful that now projects are coming to you.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. Excellent. Very good. So, for those of us, who aren't familiar with Kuwaiti literature in particular, so, I know that Saud Alsanousi is very well known. He won the 2013 Arabic Prize in Fiction. He's extremely well known in his own country, but for those of us who are unfamiliar with him and his work, can you tell us a little bit more?
Yes, yeah. So Saud has a really big following, which originally started, as you had mentioned, with him winning the International Prize for Arabic Fiction with his book, Saq al-Bamboo, The Bamboo Stalk. But prior to that, within Kuwait, he had already won a sort of national award for his first novel, which I think is called The Prison of Mirrors. he's quite an active writer, not just like with his pen, but also he gives a lot of sort of interviews, and he is a journalist as well. So he writes articles in the daily newspaper. So he's very much connected to what is happening in the country. And right now he's working on actually a piece of theater with I think it's Sheikh Al-Jaber sort of like a theater company or a cultural center. And so he also just released a new book, which has been garnering a lot of attention from readers and critics, which is called, in English, it's like Salihah's Camel. So which each work that he does, he seems to sort of stretch himself further. So this book it's a novella. It's really short. It's the first time also he's written entirely from a female perspective. And in an interview, it was really interesting. He said he gave the manuscript to like another favorite author, Kuwaiti author of mine, Buthaina Al-Aisa, to like read his work, because he found it difficult at certain parts to talk about, for example, falling in love with a man, because the love story is like a key part of this novella. And so she was giving him sort of feedback like, oh, women don't talk about their own bodies this way, or things like that.
Interesting.
Yeah, but what's really interesting about the novella itself is that it's set in like 1900s in the Gulf, in the desert, and it's a Bedouin love story, but the language itself is quite sort of archaic. And readers have said that it takes a while to get into it, but once you do, you really, just start running with the story. So he never has, it's really different to Mama Hissa's Mice, for example, which is so much more like a current historical fiction novel, and then also like speculative fiction launching us, into the future. So with each of his novels, he's really exploring a different part, I find, of his sort of tool, like set as a writer, as well as like, the content. So yeah, since Mama Hissa's Mice, I mean, he has released 2 novels, and this was his second one since then.
Right. Yeah. Publishing and translation takes a long time. So
yeah, because he originally wrote Mama Hissa's Mice in 2015.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And the last that I had read in English, the media that I was able to find, Mama Hissa's Mice had been banned and burned in Kuwait.
Yes.
Is that still the status there?
So it's no longer the status. Yes, you're completely right, which was, extremely shocking that when it was first released, it was only in bookstores for maybe 3 days before it was sort of wrenched from the shelves, and the Ministry of Information, made no qualms about sharing that they actually burned his books because it was seen to be inciting national sort of, disunity and dissension and all that, when in fact it's doing the complete opposite. But he had given this interview, I remember shortly afterwards, he was obviously very emotional that he had written the book, specifically with the Kuwaiti people in mind, and the one sort of readership he wanted to reach, he wasn't able to. But obviously people were able to get copies, pirated, whether it's online or ordering from different countries, etc. But what's really interesting is, so it was banned for about 3 years, and then I wrote the date down here. So in April 2018, they revoked the ban.
Okay.
And they reinstated sort of the books in the bookshops, and actually even it was quite odd, even gave him some sort of praise for the book that he had written. It was a complete sort of 180 or 360, sorry, no, 180, sorry, yeah, where it was like, no, we hate this book, but actually now we're going to just, thank you for writing such an important, piece of literature for our people. So it was just quite, I just found it so odd. But unfortunately, Kuwait does have a lot of censorship of novels currently, both translated from English and those written originally in Arabic as well, to the point where, like, I think last year there was this like hashtag in Arabic, which was like, banned books in Kuwait, and everyone would take a picture of the banned books that they had because they had just bought it from other places, kind of just sort of poking fun at the whole point that we've banned it, but if anything, it's going to make us want to read these books even more.
Right.
And, we're going to go out of our way to get them. So
Yeah, that I had seen that hashtag on Twitter. That was very interesting. I couldn't read the titles, but there were stacks of
Yes.
books.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is very odd that that decision was reversed, but that's wonderful. I'm so glad his book is available again where
Yeah.
it needs to be read and should be read.
Exactly. Yeah.
So exciting. As you said, you know, the book is very complex in terms of style, in terms of the depth of the content that he goes into. It's an incredible book, absolutely. You mentioned a little bit of dystopian. It's sort of a coming of age story. It's as well, I would classify it as a war story, as historical fiction.
Definitely.
It's all of these things.
Mhm.
So, how do you introduce the book when you talk about it?
I think each time as I'm kind of focusing on a different aspect of it, maybe just depending on how I'm feeling that day, because really such a mashup of so much, as you said. It's like historical fiction, then you've got this like dystopian sort of vision. But what's really interesting is when he had written it, the future sections are actually meant to be taking place in 2020, which is just next year.
Mm-hmm.
So, but in English, because we've just released it, it's kind of odd because it's only just next year. But when he wrote it in Arabic, there was at least 5 years that this is sort of the path that we're on. But yes, definitely very much like a war story, coming of age. I love like the point of view of the main character, who's a youth, and telling his perspective of Iraq invading Kuwait from a child's point of view, as well as it's also sort of I want to say like a sort of auto fiction almost, because the book is inspired. I mean, he has said in many an interview in Arabic, it's inspired by his own memories, and a lot of his uncles were involved in the conflict, and so he would hear these stories growing up in his house. And so I think it's sort of a little bit of everything. Yeah.
That's interesting. I was wondering if it was inspired by his own childhood.
Mm.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, very much so, because he's quite young. So I think he was born in 1981, and so it would have been, he's lived through of what he's talking about. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So yes, the main character is Katkut, and he's a young boy. It's about his growing up with his two best friends, and the novel jumps between their past growing up and this, what in English is just listed as present day, but that's great to know. It was supposed to be 2020, but it's not, real, because this was written in 2015. But there is all kinds of sectarian violence. Basically, the country is in war yet again, but civil war, domestic war. So that's where the dystopian sort of aspect comes from. You're going to read a little section for us. Would you like to introduce that and then go ahead?
Yes, definitely. So, I mean, while it does really focus on a lot of the political, events and the cultural richness of Kuwait, at the same time, there's a lot of, focus on the personal relationships that Katkut has, specifically with, his grandmother. Well, actually, it's his friend's grandmother, Mama Hissa. And I've chosen this section, which was one of my favorites, to translate, which is so his mother and father have agreed to leave Katkut in the care of Mama Hissa, and she makes him sleep on a mattress in her room, just to keep an eye on him. And these are like one of the scenes from their nighttime conversations, where during the day she comes across as very, she'll make a joke here or there, but she's strict. But at nighttime, he gets to see a completely different side of her, and it's much more vulnerable and sensitive. So yeah, I'm just going to read that section.
Great.
Great. Okay. Oh, right. And also oh no, I guess you'll be up. I was going to say that in this section, like, it switches the narrative. So usually he talks as I, but in the second part of the book, it becomes second person. So it's you. Yeah. You turned off the light. You groped your way through the dark. Every night, her utter devotion silenced you. You listened to her whispers as she spoke to God, intoning praises to Him before sleeping. Only with her did you feel that God was close, as if He was soaring up high in the sky above. The old woman would read verses for protection. She'd then blow into her hands. She would mumble some words, but you could only make out the ones with Subhan, praise be to, O God of the seven skies. God, I ask you, you who fed us, gave us drink, and gave us enough. There is nothing before you. Bi-ismuka, O God, in your name, I entrust myself to you. So she hadn't taken out her dentures yet. As soon as her praises to God petered out, you'd start with your questions. She would then begin telling the stories you loved, of her prayers replaced by different hissing sounds. She answered your every question, telling you all kinds of stories, but not the one about the 4 mice that she had promised. She always postponed it to the next night. She spoke about whatever she wanted to speak about. You understood some of what she said. There was a lot you didn't know. She would speak, propelled by the need to speak, with your questions or without them. At nighttime, Mama Hissa became something else entirely. In these nightly story sessions, you learned what you didn't before, such as why Mama Hissa came down hard on Saleh. It was because he himself was so strict with Fawzia. Saleh was in charge at, and only at, home, a man lording his misfortune over his sick fatherless sister. Why was Fawzia ill? It was a trial from God. Why did God put her to test? He was testing her. Why was he testing her? Because he loved her. Doesn't God love me? I'm healthy and don't have any sicknesses. Shut up and ask God for forgiveness. God, forgive me. May he forgive you, my boy. If she passed the test, would God forgive her? The real test is with your mother, Miss Principal, you fool. When has God ever given her a test? I've never seen a jahil like you who asks so many questions. I'm not a child. When did God try her? When her father died in those coffee shop bombings 5 years ago, Katkut. How she cried, but even when faced with her crying, I wasn't able to cry. I didn't cry for Saleh's father, but I cried for Fawzia. Daddy's girl is what he used to call her. God rest his soul. I cried for her when we had to take her to the hospital completely in pieces. She'd fainted. Saleh, who I wanted to be a man in his father's absence, became a child. Aisha, since the beginning, was Aisha. I didn't detect any sadness in her at Saleh's dad's departure. Maybe she still considers him alive in those photos that she keeps, silly woman. The old lady fell silent. Mama Hissa, did you fall asleep? Where would sleep come from, my son? God, please heal her and strengthen her. She spoke to you about her love for Fawzia, Daddy's girl, the apple of her eye, and how God had granted her life in her womb after the death of 9 boys between Saleh's birth and that of his sister. She started repeating what her daughter's doctor had said after losing Saleh's dad, a sudden high spike in blood sugar, a symptom of a psychological crisis. The doctor didn't disguise his concern about the possibility of the momentary crisis becoming a lasting sickness due to Fawzia's genetic predisposition, her neglect of treatment, and a lax approach to eating what was off limits. Then what happened, Mama Hissa? It wasn't a matter of 2 days, as the doctor had said. Other than illness, what else have I passed on to my daughter? She used to remind me when to take my medication. Now we remind each other. Does Saleh hate Fawzia? Saleh hates his weakness, poor man. He feels helpless, but he loves his sister and worries about her. In spite of what he did to her yesterday, Fawzia didn't challenge him. She understands that he loves her, and what he did was only out of worry for her. You were in the courtyard when he came down to the living room, the electric razor in hand, crying like a jahil, his mother's dearest soul. I'll stop there.
That's fantastic. It's such insight because, as you say, Katkut is the neighbor's he's living with the neighbors.
Mhm.
Mama Hissa is one thing outside of her bedroom during the day, but there is such tenderness between them,
Yes.
and she is very much his grandmother.
Yes, yeah, and she's kind of just sharing with him all of her sort of worries about her own son, who's, you know, called Saleh, who's really an authoritarian sort of figure in Katkut's life here, and also her concern for her own daughter Fazia, who Katkut has a bit of a crush on.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I just thought, I mean, it goes on for much longer, but it was just one of my favorite passages to translate, especially with all like the sibilant sounds, because
Yes.
in Arabic, all those words start with the letter sin, which is the S, but in
Okay.
English, it's not in the beginning. So I try to choose words where it's in the, like, either in the middle or the end, just to sort of mimic the sounds. Yeah.
That's excellent. Yeah, it's always such an insight to know what you did there.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, the book was, I can only imagine, was incredibly complex to translate, as you say, you know, the stylistically. So it is first person and then it becomes second person. There is so much cultural, historical detail and richness,
Yeah.
all of which is evident in the book. And for someone like me who is not familiar with the details of the culture and the history, it's perfectly readable and we learn a lot. And yet I always had this sense that there was so much just beneath that I wish I could have deciphered a little better.
Mm-mm-mm.
And you know, I had read that Saud had commented that, you know, this book is about the Kuwaiti culture and the Kuwaiti people, and he felt a great responsibility in putting this out there and to have people understand it. So I'd love to hear from your point of view, how you felt, what you did, how you tried to illuminate or not things for us.
So I'm really glad to hear that it was still readable, just
Hmm.
because there is a lot that we're expecting of the reader, you know, when they're taking on a book like this.
Yeah.
I was trying to go with the sort of, you know, analogy that when you visit a foreign country and you don't speak the language, you're still able to make out things from, you know, physical cues or you know, visual similarities between things, but you're a little bit disoriented. You know, when you're in a foreign country, people don't always spell out things for you. So to be honest, there was, I mean, in terms of deciding how much, you know, sort of support to give the reader, there was a little bit of tension between myself and the editors at Amazon Crossing, because I wanted to give like a little bit less and they wanted to give more.
Okay.
And so in the end, we kind of came to this, you know, agreement. But I, to be honest, would have taken away even more of sort of the support. But actually now, having heard people's responses to it, I guess I'm glad that we went with the approach that we did, where, you know, there is sort of, I mean, different ways, as you know, to do is like stealth gloss, where you would explain something within a sentence. But a lot, you know, a lot of the time, there was also a discussion about possibly putting footnotes, and I'm really against footnotes. So, you know, it was like, no.
I'm so glad you didn't put footnotes.
Yeah.
It changes the tenor of the book.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But to be honest, when I found out I was doing the book, it was even before I had actually started, I factored in this sort of time, because even though I'm a Middle Eastern studies major, we never focused that much on the Gulf.
Okay.
When I studied, it was more so the Levant or Egypt. And so even if it was the Gulf, maybe like a little bit of Omani history, but Kuwait was never considered a country that, unfortunately, at that time when I was like, you know, studying like 2004, you know, 2005, a country that deserved focus in a Middle Eastern studies program. So what I did is, luckily, because, you know, we have the great Cambridge University Library here, I went out and checked out all these books on Kuwaiti history and culture, and just spent a whole month reading different books. And I also started watching like Kuwaiti soap operas, because there's a lot of Kuwaiti dialect in the book. which
Okay.
I'm not familiar with. So it was a sort of crash course in just, immersing myself in all aspects of the country, because I haven't been to Kuwait myself. And I am much more familiar with like Jordan and Palestine and Lebanon and their history and language, and that's the dialect that I speak when I speak Arabic. So yeah, I felt a huge sort of onus on me, because even like Buthaina al-Isa, who I've mentioned previously, who's another sort of leading author in Kuwait, has this famous quote that, if something happened to Kuwait where like the entire population or country was wiped off the map, this is the one book that should remain, that like, people should cling to. And I was like, oh my God. Just because she thinks it, which it does, it gives the narrative of its history and its people and such richness and detail, and with such sentiment, so yeah, I think there was a lot of preparation on my behalf. And then I'm also very thankful to Saud, who was very patient with all of my questions. I definitely asked a lot of questions for things that I, couldn't find online, because they were during a certain time period, which, people didn't really research. Also, I was lucky to have Mona Karim, who is a Kuwaiti poet and also professor working in the US. And she did the edits for the book. So she also checked to see, like, if I had maybe strayed too far, or if there was something I had misunderstood. There's a lot of, as you had said, sort of suggestions, which even a lot of Arab readers I know, so, I have a lot of like Arab friends, even when they read the book, they're like, there was a lot of things they even felt that they were missing, because the book is so Kuwait sort of focused. But what I realized at the end is that I can't sort of throw in everything in the kitchen sink at the reader. Like, there's going to be things that we have to leave out, or that won't come across to the same sort of with the same sort of immediacy as it does maybe to a Kuwaiti reader. So I kind of just tried to focus on the key things that I thought would be really important for the reader to sort of come along for the ride. And that if there was things to be further delved into, then people could sort of Google it. Like, so for example, they have in the beginning of each of so he's divided the book into different mice, and he uses poetry from really well-known poets in the beginning of each of those sections. So it's not just the excerpt of poetry itself, but if you know that poet's work, then you kind of have a sort of a glimmer of an understanding of what this section is going to be like. Is there going to be a lot of sort of loss in it, or is there going to be more so like hope or something? But in the English, that obviously doesn't come across, because it's just like 4 lines of poetry. But yeah, so there's just like things like that, unfortunately, which couldn't. Yeah.
Still, that's so fascinating, and you give us such a great picture, for those who are watching who aren't translators or aren't really familiar with a translator's work, but just the depth and the dedication and the detail that translators have to go into in order to accurately and faithfully portray what an author was attempting to do. So the fact that you've spent a month reading and researching, and and there certainly are soap operas in the book as well, so understanding that whole side, it's and then having a Kuwaiti poet to look at it as well from that standpoint, who speaks English. It really gives us a sense of what went into this book.
Yes.
That's incredible. Yeah. And you were also saying as well that the whole aspect of leaving certain things to the reader. I think that certainly while those in Kuwait may have got more references, as you say, anyone reading the book in Arabic who wasn't from Kuwait has to interpret and read certain things into it, and therefore the same is true in English.
Yeah.
And I would argue that is the same of any book. An author can put so much into it, but it's up to the reader what their world and life experience has been, what they're going to take out of it. So it
Definitely.
seems very reflective.
Yes, yeah, because I was really concerned in the beginning about, oh, well, I'm not explaining this and this is important. But, I think once I had spoken to some friends, as you just said, and realized, well, actually, like they're Arab and they're not getting everything.
Mm-hmm.
So that's actually, then it's okay. Like if in English, it's going to be the same thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and personally, I like it when an author and a translator treat me as intelligent, and
Yes,
even if I'm not, even if I felt, definitely. But I think one of the things about this particular book, Mama Hissa's Mice, is that it leaves me wanting to know more. It did make me realize that Kuwait was a gap in my understanding of the world,
as
without
it
a
wasn't
doubt.
mine. I mean, as I said, which was really shocking for me because that's my area of expertise is the Arab world.
Yeah.
But it just shows that it's really a country that's been overlooked in terms of its literary production, but also its historical significance in the region.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so interesting, and therefore so important that this book has come out in English. Yeah, wonderful. So what is it that, Sawad, that you would like readers to take away from this book?
Yeah, I think this is important.
No pressure.
Yeah. I mean, like, as you've said, I think obviously each reader will take away something different. But I think what I want them to realize is that the main reason why I do translate literature from the Arab world is to sort of make connections and to break down stereotypes. And I think so often the focus is put on like us versus them in the sense of like Muslims versus, non-Muslims, especially with this whole sort of climate of terrorism and,
Yes.
ISIS and all of that. And I think what I wanted people to realize is when you're reading the book is that there's so much complexity within the country itself where you have even, Muslim against Muslim, right? There's that really famous line in the book when his mother's like, you're Muslim and that's it. Like, shouldn't that be enough? Like, why do you need to identify yourself as Sunni or Shia or, etc. So I think what I just want people to take away is that things are a lot more layered than you think. It's not, it's not so clear cut as like, or superficial as the media makes it seem. And also, which is what, I took away from this book is that Kuwait is not a country to be overlooked. Since I've done this book, when I was translating it, I started reading so much more Kuwaiti literature than I myself had done before. And there's been other translations into English of Kuwaiti literature as well, just in the past 2 years. Since Saud did win the IPAF, I think more publishers were interested in what else is coming out of Kuwait. So yeah, I guess I would just want people to take that away, that, there's a lot more under the surface than what it looks like.
Yeah, that's fantastic. There absolutely is. And I couldn't agree more that the whole purpose of, of literary translation is to make those connections. And that is a hugely important job. So wonderful. Yeah. Thank you so much for this book. Congratulations to you and to Saud Alsanousi. It is, I think, a really important work. I certainly enjoyed it. I was challenged by it, but I like that. I think it is important to be challenged by the things that we read and to realize the gaps in our own knowledge and understanding of the world, and to incite that desire to learn and know more. So
thank you so much. No, it's really great to hear.
That's good.
Yeah, as we were saying, it's quite polarizing, I think, as a work. I think some people, as you've just said, would appreciate kind of being thrown into the deep end, and others would be like, no, it's too much. And so, I get that. It's not everybody will like it, but I appreciate I thank you for taking the time to read it.
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah. And I absolutely will keep my eye open for more Kuwaiti literature, and certainly for whatever you're translating next. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks so much.
Great. It has been lovely to talk to you, Sawad. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. Yes, it's really been a pleasure speaking with you.
Great. So for everyone watching or listening, we'll be sure to include, of course, Sawad's whole bio, information about the book, where she can be found online, everything so that you too can get a copy of Mama Hissa's Mice and read it. If you enjoyed this spotlight, please do subscribe to the Intralingo YouTube channel, ring the bell to get further updates, and follow us on Facebook or Twitter or wherever, and we will continue to bring you world literature.